Hi, welcome back to this Friday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Focal Point, the program, the network, AFR Talk. And I will just offer this analysis without a comment. You just heard Jeff Reed. I think he produces the best audio intros in talk radio. You just heard at the top of the hour, just before we came on air, the teaser for this hour of a Focal Point. Now, here's the only observation I want to make. The way I do show prep is I wade through pages of reports from the Congressional Research Service. The way Jeff does show prep is he watches Bambi. Now, that's all I'm going to say. No commentary needed. And we'll get to that story about the fawn here. Now, if Jeff is still speaking to me, I'm going to have him play a soundbite here. And we've talked about the fact, we'll get to these economic numbers here if we can. The jobs report, 77% of all the jobs in 2013 are part-time jobs. So you'll hear Obama out there talking about 1 million jobs this year. It's under 1 million, it's 900 and something thousand. But 77% of those, 731,000 of those are part-time jobs. Why? Because people are cutting hours, so they're not obligated under Obamacare to provide health insurance. There's a story named Triggs. It's in, this is in Minnesota, I believe. The story comes off the WJFW.com website, and it's one of the biggest employers in that part of Minnesota. But this story indicates that, look, about two-thirds, they've got 1,100 employees, about two-thirds of them are part-timers. If they work more than 30 hours a week, then Obama's legislation treats them as full-time and forces the supermarket to provide them with health insurance. And this would take the company under. So let's listen to an excerpt of this report from Channel 12 in Minocqua, Minnesota.
They work more than 30 hours per week. President Obama's health care legislation technically considers them full-time. That means Triggs would be forced to provide health insurance to those workers. The report said keeping the work schedules as they were and providing health coverage would have been disastrous to the company's bottom line.
Doing nothing was not an option. It would have put us out of business. Within a year, it would have put us out of business. There's no doubt about that.
So President Obama is going to try to demonize employers like the Super. Well, it's their fault. They're the ones that are reducing hours. I'm not doing that. I'm not making them do that. But the reality is, this is the director of personnel there saying, look, if we don't make this adjustment, we're out of business. So what happens if they go out of business? Right now, their part-time employees are not going to have health insurance because of Obama, but at least they've got a job. If the supermarket does what Obama wants them to do and will demonize them for not doing, if the supermarket was to try to comply with Obamacare and not make any changes, then they would be out of business and nobody would have a job. So maybe now you've got 800 people that don't have jobs, but 1,100 people that don't have insurance, but 1,100 people have jobs. If Obamacare would put them completely out of business, and you'd have 1,100 people with no insurance and no jobs whatsoever. So it's the little guy, as always, that gets hurt. Now, Ted Cruz did an interview with, that was printed out. I'm trying to see who did this interview. Last name is Decker. I don't have his first name. See if I can find out who did this interview. Yeah, Brett Decker. He's the editor-in-chief of a website called Rare.us. He did an interview with Ted Cruz. And he asked Ted Cruz, what's the thing that surprised you the most? He's a freshman senator. What's been your biggest surprise since coming to the Senate? He says, my biggest surprise has been the defeatism among some Republicans here. The defeatism among some Republicans here. They don't even want to fight. They lay down without firing a shot. And I want to go back, before we go back to the phones, 888-589-8840, just go back to this report from the Congressional Research Service. While Jeff's out there watching animated movies, I'm wading through this legalese stuff, this bureaucratese. But remember, the Obama administration has burned through $1 billion in implementation fund. That's already gone. So they have come back and they've asked, they plan to spend $1.5 billion in this coming year. They're asking for $1.5 billion. They got a little bit left over, so they don't need a whole $1.5 billion, but they're planning to spend $1.5 billion. Right here it says, this is Congressional Research Service, HHS officials expect to spend about $1.5 billion on ACA implementation in fiscal year 2013. That's the one that starts on October 1st, primarily to establish the federally facilitated exchanges and related information technology, the data services hub. Remember, that's where all your personal information is going to be there for all these low-trained, no background check, low-level bureaucrats to rummage around in all your personal information. I mean, the possibility of identity theft compromise here is just absolutely huge. And to conduct consumer outreach and education. They want to give all this money to Planned Parenthood and their union buddies to go out there door to door and sign people up and have access to all your personal information. So in the absence of any fiscal year 2013 discretionary funding for these activities, and then they go on about how HHS is going to try to bend the law and work around the law to get this done. But here is my point. They need $1.5 billion to implement, to set up these federally facilitated exchanges, to come up with the information technology, and to conduct all these consumer outreach and education. They don't have it. This is what they would be denied statutorily by law if the continuing resolution is not funded. So Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Rand Paul are exactly right. If the law meant anything, if you vote against the continuing resolution, you would halt the implementation of Obamacare. They wouldn't have the $1.5 billion they need to set up these exchanges. Remember, everything's got to be sold through these exchanges. They wouldn't have the money to set them up. They don't have the money for the information technology, this data services hub, which will compromise your identity. And they wouldn't have money for all this consumer outreach and education. So Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, exactly right. Go to don'tfundobamacare.com. Don't let your senators lie to you. This thing can be defunded. Implementation can be defunded by voting against this continuing resolution. You know, and if President Obama is all that interested in seeing this thing go forward, why doesn't he donate? Why doesn't he stay home like you and I are doing this summer for our vacations? Or we're taking inexpensive vacations, inexpensive places. Why doesn't he stay home and donate the money he's going to spend at Martha's Vineyard? Why doesn't he donate it to the implementation of Obamacare if it means that much to him? 888-589-8840. We'll take your phone calls coming right out of the break. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, do not let them lie to you. There is almost $1.5 billion in the continuing resolution that Kathleen Sebelius says she has to have to implement this thing. If the law means anything, I mean, they will find some way to work around it. I have no doubt about that. They'll break the law. They'll do something that's illegal and unconstitutional to spend the money. So they'll try to find a way to do it. If the law and the Constitution meant anything, a vote against the continuing resolution would stop the implementation of Obamacare dead in its tracks. No federal exchanges, no information technology, no consumer outreach and education could be stopped. Focal Point AFR Talk.
Here's